Makisha, thank you for that great intro. And thanks to the Startup Grind community for having Snowflake back for our second go at it. It's a fun community, an engaging community, and it's just cool to get a finger on the pulse of what these startups in this group are doing. So pretty much all bases covered, but that is Proton and I. We've worked together for a number of years now. Personally, I've been at Snowflake for about 6.5 years. Proton, if you want to give a couple sentences on yourself, that would be great.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. I've been at Snowflake for 3.5 years. Worked with you for quite some time, and I'm excited about this because it's for me it's the most important part of any product is when people actually use it. But for Snowflake, we've been dogfooding our solution since day one, and there have been learnings along the way that are useful even today. So we started as a small company that used Snowflake. Now we're a big company that uses Snowflake, and I'm excited to share what we've learned along the way.
Yeah, amen to that. And just so everybody in this session knows, Proton and I are the two-person group behind Snowflake Startup Program, which can claim a few hundred startups ranging from literally one-person shops to companies that are getting ready for a pretty large IPO. So we are pretty well versed in supporting startups on their journey, and that's where we pull from some of our learnings here. We also just pull from our learnings as a startup ourselves, which I'll get into. So what we're going to cover today, we're going to talk about kind of a retrospective look at how did Snowflake use data to scale revenue? Like, how did we eat our own dog food? What role did it play in the growth that we saw as a company in the last 6+ years? We're going to take lessons that can be applied to any company, especially startups, and talk about how they can similarly use data to scale revenue, or at least incorporate a plan to. Then I'm going to hand over the virtual mic to Proton. He's going to cover what are the A, B's, and C's of starting an analytics stack, and go into the intricacies of what architectures we're helping startups build. And we'll have any room for questions. We should have about 10 minutes or so, which we will leave towards the end of the session. And we'll start with what is Snowflake, right? We actually went public exactly a year ago, so it's kind of a significant day for us. But we are a cloud data platform, or a data cloud as we like to call it. We were invented in 2012 by two really smart, really friendly engineers who left Oracle because they saw an opportunity to build something cloud native. If you think about where the cloud industry was in 2012, it was just taking its first steps, and they saw an opportunity to build a really scalable data platform, data product that took full advantage of that cloud. So they headed off and started Snowflake on their own. You can see, we've grown a lot since 2012. We have about 5,000 customers. We serve well both in the Fortune 500, but also in those 1-2 person startup spaces. And you can boil our key use cases really down to 6, which we feature below. But we help a lot in these categories, really data engineering, data lake use cases, data warehouse use cases, which was our initial bread and butter. More so now than ever in the data science world, the data application world, which is where companies and primarily startups actually build their product on top of Snowflake. And we also have a ton of functionality around sharing data, which we see some cool applications of in the last 1.5 years through sharing COVID case rates and vaccination rates. So sitting today, we're at about 5,000 customers, but I'll tell you what, it was not always that way. So this was the building that it all got started in. So on the left, you see Phil's on the first floor. And the 3 windows up at the top, the 4 windows is where our building started out as. It was our first office. And I like to highlight the proximity that office had to the Caltrain, which is the massive Bay Area train system that I'm sure a lot of you know about. So twice an hour, we would just have an end of the world apocalyptic rumbling going on that would pause any engineering meetings or sales calls that we had at the moment. So I encourage you guys to take a step back and think about, where were we as a company at that time? This is just about where I actually joined spring 2015. So we had 31 mil sitting in the bank, which seemed like a ton at the time. In today's VC world, it's not as significant, but at the time it seemed like something. I had about 60 employees, and that was, I'd say, 90 to 95% engineers. So we were totally focused on building the product, and we were not thinking yet about marketing it, selling it, or just kind of the intricacies of a company, the HR department, the finance department, everything that makes it hum. And I will liberally say that we had 3 customers, so we'll call it 3-ish customers, that would range from maybe having a first meeting to actually maybe trusting us with some non-sensitive data. So we truly were just getting started, and looking back at that time, success was just really not a guarantee. So I joined in 2015. I started in the sales org. We got a few early adopters. So we had people who saw our architecture, saw what our product was capable of, certainly not what it was doing, but what it was capable of. And they took a strategic bet on us, and they said, we'll try Snowflake at our company, but we know it's a massive risk. So we had our early adopters. Now what do we do as a sales org and as a company as a whole? So I thought back, what were the key lessons? The first thing we really did was we spun up a business intelligence tool. At the time, we were using Looker. The first step that we kind of came to as an organization was we'd identify what metrics represented the health of a customer, because we were starting to get our very first few. So for today, we're going to call that the heartbeat metrics, right? Like what makes your company beat? What makes your customers' heart beat? What are the best indicators of success that you can identify? Then we built basic, easy to digest dashboards for non-technical users that shows this data on an individual account level, and also, in the future, we did to the team and region level. And the third step was to really enable a sales org that, again, was not technical, how to translate that heartbeat metric data that they could see in their customers to actionable insights, and ultimately help them become better sellers and help Snowflake scale up. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about how we were using that data. So we had to identify what our heartbeat metrics were, right? So what best represents the health of a Snowflake customer? We boiled it down really to 4. So the numbers of queries run was significant, right? The more you were querying the system, the more you were using the system. And we found that correlated nicely to deriving value out of it. Another one that was equally as important was how much storage was consumed, right? Like how much data were they trusting us with? How much data did they have? How much data were they able to successfully load without issue? Those are all important metrics for us to understand. The third piece was how much compute was consumed. So it ties closely with the numbers of queries run, but how much did they use as far as number of end users, how big of workloads were they running on Snowflake? That kind of information could be derived from looking at how much compute they actually used. And the fourth piece ties in with the queries and the compute, but how many active users did they have, right? Was it growing month over month? Do we know what departments are being launched? Is the finance team starting to use it? Is the marketing team starting to use it? You could really draw a lot of conclusions just by looking at these metrics. And we break it into the boxes below, and we're going to go through that one by one right now. So data, looking back, really helped us to what I like to call supercharge evaluations, right? So when you're a startup, you're going to have prospects that are going to want to try out your technology. If you don't have insights into how they're using it, you're going to have to just take them at their word that they actually ran the test and that they actually committed time to evaluating it. What I found a lot of the time was they just kind of say that so you'll get off their back. And The benefit of actually having the data of how many queries have they run, how much storage have they used, is you don't have to just trust their word. You can actually see if they've tested at all. And on top of that, you can come into any meetings that you have as they're testing really knowledgeable about what they've accomplished. And if you notice that they didn't load a data set that you talked about loading with them, you can make a plan towards actually solving for that. So looking back at this leveraging of data really helped us become a better customer advocate, because we could see, on an hour by hour, minute by minute, day by day measure how much they're using. And if one day their usage completely spikes, that could be a good sign. It means maybe they're using Snowflake more than they were before. Or it can be a bad sign, right? It means they're unintentionally spending dollars on Snowflake, which is my nightmare, and it makes really unhappy prospective customers. So you can intervene super early and actually gain some trust by telling them, hey, you ran this query wrong, you set up this environment wrong, and it's spending more credits than I think you're intending. And ultimately, like, what is the big business outcome that helps correlate to? It's mitigating churn, right? Even though these are semi-unpleasant conversations, they're going to be a lot uglier if you don't intervene immediately. So we were able to prevent that through using our basic heartbeat metrics. This is an important one. So having an understanding of those heartbeat metrics really made it easier to justify the price tag of Snowflake, especially if you're going into a pricing conversation with somebody that doesn't necessarily understand our technology or how it's being leveraged internally at their company. For example, a CFO. They want hard metrics to understand how it's being adopted. And so that data can give you confidence. You can say, our price tag is this because you have 300 users and it's growing 25% month over month. You've run this many queries where you were only able to run this smaller amount on the previous solution. So you can kind of carry a little bit of a swagger into any pricing conversations just by having pretty basic data sets on customer usage. So you can develop a more accurate sales pipeline. I know this is one preached by our leadership down, but usage is the strongest indicator of a deal's likelihood of closing, right? So if people are not going in and they're not logging in and running queries and loading data, you likely don't have a deal. And that concept carries over to any product or solution that you might be selling. If people aren't using it, they're not validating that it fits their business needs, and they're not going to write a check for you ultimately at the end of the day. Also, that usage data helps determine the appropriate contract size because we charge based on storage and based on compute. So this is an important one, and it's one where you can actually develop some really strong champions internally at a company. But champion, for those who don't know, is basically in sales terms somebody that's going to sponsor your technology, your product, from bringing it in for an evaluation all the way to executing a signed contract and beyond. And you want to give that champion ammunition to prove that this was a smart product decision, that it's being adopted, and it's making an impact. And you can do that through showing how many people are using the system, how much are they using the system, how much data are they putting in the system. So you make their life easier on their side of the house. So this is a dance that I know we really prioritize and had to iterate on for years. And I see a lot of other startups that I speak to, they're trying to figure the same thing out. How do we correlate what our product does and how people use it to business value? Ultimately, a company's going to purchase your product because it's proven to have some business value for them. So we kind of broke it into a three-part equation. The first is on the top right. So who are the internal and external consumers of a given data set? Maybe it's the finance team, maybe it's the executive leadership team to start. Insights derived, right? Like, why are those people looking at that data set, and what are the most important metrics that they're tracking? And ultimately, you want to find out, like, what mission critical company-wide initiatives are those dashboards tied to and associated with. And then you answer the question on the bottom right? So the motivation for them to look at that data. Why are those consumers looking at those insights? If you learn how to ask questions that are specific to your product in a certain cadence, you can answer what business value it's going to create for the customer without the feeling of a negotiation where you're really prying too hard. It's more trying to help them accomplish a means to an end alongside them. So looking at data helps a sales org and a company in general figure out where they should invest their time across their customer base, right? So sometimes people say, oh yeah, apologies for that. Sometimes people assume Fortune 500 is just what you should go after as a business and as a startup, and you should divert all attention that way. That's one approach. I think it's a little outdated. I think you actually should let data and usage drive where you're going to divert attention. So we had a lot of examples where some company that frankly no one had ever heard of ended up being a really big data consumer and consumed a lot of Snowflake. And they maybe were only a 25-person shop, but they were a very data-driven shop. And because we were able to look across our customer base and see consumption trends and who was consuming what, we knew to focus our sales attention to these companies that didn't have the biggest brand recognition, but had proven through data that they were going to be heavy consumers of Snowflake. And you can do that across the board. Sometimes a company you think would be a big data consumer in our world turns out not to be. So just don't make assumptions, let the data drive where you focus. And it's also a good way to just find gold. I mean, sometimes we had companies that no one had ever spoken to that came onto our system self-service, and we identified just through their usage as somebody we should be talking to. So the data can also tell you certain patterns and tell you where to focus your go-to-market from a sales and marketing perspective. So what industries, what regions are using your product most heavily? Does your go-to-market strategy actually match to what you're seeing through consumption across users? An example of that is in our early days when we were still, 50 or so people, we didn't know what industries we were strong in because we just hadn't made a presence in any of them yet. But we learned through data that ad tech companies and gaming companies were consuming heavily once they got on Snowflake. And so as an organization, we did a really strong short-term pivot to try to speak to every ad tech company and every gaming company we could and tell them what we could potentially enable for them. If we didn't have the data to look at, to know to pivot based on their consumption, we would have missed out on a ton of early adopter customers as a result. And it evolves over time, right? Like that was what made sense at 50 employees. And then at 200 employees, other industries will start to open up to you and you'll have to pivot accordingly. So, as far as like an attack plan, I think people can take out of this call, try to identify what the heartbeat metrics are for your customers that best correlate to the health of the customer. You can be pre-customer really to do this exercise, but an example that we baked up, so a live chat software that helps companies, set more meetings, right? Maybe that pops up when you visit a company's website. What should the heartbeat metrics be for a product like that? A few that would make sense off the top of mind are number of meetings scheduled by that little bot, the revenue tied to the meeting set via that chat bot, and the days between chat and customer conversion, right? Ideally, you want to prove that your solution helps increase meetings, increase revenue, and decrease days between chat and conversion. Then you're going to build out a sales org and you're going to equip them to speak to how can those three changes that we see in the middle, the heartbeat metrics, correlate to business value for a customer. So key takeaways on my end. What does data in heartbeat metrics in early days allow you to do? It allows you to eliminate assumptions, right? So you don't have to ask, are they actually testing? Are they close to production? You can know with certainty. And then you can have a conversation about why they're either short of expectations or, doing really well and it's maybe time for a contract. Helps you maintain control, right? You know what value they're getting from your product, either too little or too much. And it gives you either confidence in negotiation or it makes you realize, wow, we have a lot of work to do to keep this customer, happy like we should. You can mitigate unhappy customers, right? You can catch issues early. You earn trust that way. As a sales org, you can forecast with confidence. Should not be forecasting a deal if you're not seeing the usage associated that you want to see. You can double down on growing customers, let data dictate where you're going to spend your resources, and you can better tie product usage to business value, right? You can make your sales org and arm them with a foolproof business case, just kind of going through that series of questions that we went through together. Now, let's talk about the X's and O's of actually building super basic analytics stack. Proton, I'll hand it over to you, my friend.
Cool. Thanks, Ben. So what Ben said from the business side is really important, because we've noticed that in an organization, it's great if you can have the whole organization look at a certain metric or a certain outcome, and everybody's working toward that. And that comes naturally when you're a small company, when it's just a few dozen people working out of the same office or now remotely. As you grow, that will become harder and harder. So that's why it's really important to have a well thought out approach to how the data is actually moving. And from our experience, obviously we've been using Snowflake since day one, but Snowflake doesn't do everything by design. So we've had to work with our partners, with others in the space, to make sure that that Snowflake works well for other people, obviously, but that it works well for us internally as well. And what we've found is that turns out it is true that you want to outsource as much of your non-core competency as possible. And you will be surprised how many startups, how many Fortune 100 companies have yet to learn that lesson. Ben and I have seen C-level executives and directors and managers leave their companies because of a failed transition, because of a botched migration. So this is really important to get right at first. And it is also really important to fix as quickly as possible if you have not gotten it right first. So let's talk about the specifics here. Your data will come from many different locations, and it will come in different formats that you do not control. So that's a given. And then you should not expect that, starting November 1st, finally, I'm going to have my schema right. I'm going to have my data structure figured out. And since, starting that day, everything will be great. That's never going to happen. We have many times we've expected that to happen. You finally finish your project, you finally finish your sprint, and then something breaks. Things will continue breaking. Your partners will continue giving you data where the scheme of that data changes either with very little or with no warning. And you have to, on the fly, expect that change and make sure that you're able to embrace it. So how do you do that? Well, you have to, if we take that to be, if we take that at face value, if we take the fact that that there will be more data, it will keep changing, you're not going to be warned about those changes, and you're going to have to act on those changes, then you have to build a system that is resilient and that expects changes as part of its day-to-day. So what that means is you want all of the data to be sitting in one place, and you want that place to have a format of your choosing that most things work with. And now that's kind of nebulous for some of the more technical people on the call. I know that probably sounds a lot like a data lake, but there are better ways of doing it. Do not go in creating a data lake from day one. What you can do is, and what we've seen people do, is to choose a format for if you're using Snowflake, if you're using some of our competitors, that usually is Parquet. So everything gets turned into Parquet, everything gets turned into another semi-structured format, maybe like JSON maybe, and then you work off of that. That gives you a number of advantages. Chiefly among them is the fact that you don't care about your CSVs coming from your SaaS tools. You don't care about your weblog data being turned from JSON to Parquet, because those eventually what is going to, what you're working on is just those raw Parquet files. So if you do that, then you have to have a system that is that is fast, efficient, and is able to work with those Parquet files. And I'm biased, but that is Snowflake. Snowflake can load raw Parquet files as is. Even if you don't end up choosing Snowflake, there's a bunch of other ones there as well. But the point here is that you want to minimize the number of hops and the number of transformations that your data goes through. That saves you time and money, of course, but it also saves you potential breaks. The fewer amount of those changes you have to make, the fewer things that can break, and the fewer people and hours you're going to need to maintain that. Really, really important, because whatever amount of time you're spending right now on maintaining your data pipeline, that will increase. I wish it weren't so. There's just so much money being spent on tools that are supposed to make that problem go away. It has not gone away. I don't think it will go away. So you kind of have to embrace the chaos that is going to be your data pipeline, and have it be as efficient as possible. Have the kind of ordered chaos there. So data is coming in, that is going to come in CSVs, in Parquet files, in JSON files, in XML files, in audio files, web logs, text files. All of that will have to end up in one place, and ideally in one file format that you can work with. So how do you do that? How do you take the data from those different sources and put it all in one place? Well, fortunately, we have this great space of partners and companies that have done that, and they're all great. Well, not all of them. The ones that are listed here are great, and then there's other ones that are maybe more legacy, and they do different things well. I would recommend that if you're choosing an ETL tool or EOT tool to take the data from your systems and put it in your database, that you choose one of the ones listed here, because they do what they do well. They are all SaaS, either SaaS native or SaaS forward, meaning they focus most of their engineering resources on the future rather than maintaining legacy systems. And that's what you want. You want your vendors, you want your tools to be aligned with your success. You don't want to hire a company that is kind of 50-50. Oh yeah, we support Salesforce, and we support Marketo, and we support these SaaS tools, and we support Postgres, but 50 or 60% of our engineering hours are actually going into supporting on-prem servers. So choose a ETL tool that will support you. In terms of which ones you choose, I would recommend that you test a few of them, do a quick POC, do not get bogged down, have a specific idea in mind. What is it that you want from your ETL tool? I would recommend you choose an ETL tool that is easy to use, that you don't have to maintain. Yes, you might pay a few, 10, 15, 20, 50K more a year. That money is so much, it's so well spent, you have no idea until you have to hire engineers to maintain your ETL pipeline. You're not going to know how much money and how much time you're actually spending by choosing a full stack and a full service ETL tool. Again, I recommend something that's completely SaaS, completely hands off. If something breaks, you just go to them and you say fix it, rather than you having to spend engineering hours on it. After that, we've gotten the data from our sources, we've moved it around, we've cleaned it up if we needed to, and we've put it in one of the databases. Databases can be, ideally it is Snowflake, but it could be BigQuery, that is Google Cloud's analytical database. It could be Synapse, which is Microsoft Azure's analytical database, or it could be Redshift, which is AWS analytical database. All of them work great. They have different, they're built for different things. They're, if you ask each of us, we're going to say that we're the best. Obviously, we have our strengths and weaknesses. I think all of us recognize that. If you choose one of 4 of those, I think you're going to be good. Good to go. Again, you want a database that aligns with your business objectives. This goes back to something that Ben alluded to. when you're doing a POC for any vendor, you want to think about the business outcome of why you're and how you're going to be using that tool. You don't want to just be talking about um, which database ingests my data the fastest. If that's important for you, then there is a business outcome that is tied to that. So then you should be asking which database allows me to get insights from my data the fastest. That is the business outcome. That is what you should be focusing on. And you should force your vendors and your tools to answer that question for you, rather than them coming to you and saying, well, we're really good at this thing. And then if you don't care about that thing, that's great that they're that they're very fast at ingesting XML data. But if you don't have any XML data, then it doesn't matter. So always go back to your business objectives and always think about what is the job to be done here. What do I actually care about? So that's really important. And again, when you're choosing an ETL tool, a database, or a visualization tool, think about what are the business outcomes and tie those to your to the testing. So we've moved the data. Now it's all in the database. Ideally, it gets there with minimal transformations. It gets there very quickly. Maybe it even gets there through a streaming process, and it's real time. So the ideal use case here is all of the data from every system that you have, including partners and external tools, is sitting in one place, and it's ready to be queryable in real time. So I can go in, I can ad hoc run some SQL if I know SQL. I can go and visualize it with my visualization tools that you see on the right. And I can also go in and run my data science processes. Eventually, you will, if you work for a company that has that in its product roadmap, you'll probably be delivering that data to partners and customers in some way. It can be in an app. It can be actual product deliverables where you're putting files in people's S3 buckets, for example, or it could be that you are sharing that data with others outside of the organization or internally. If that is the case, then you do want that data to be as close to real time as possible. And you want that data to be actionable as quickly as possible. So that's kind of like the North Star is to be to have that data be available there for everyone as quickly as possible. If you can do that from the get-go, that's great. If you can't, then you should start thinking about that, because nobody wants stale data. I know people say, "Oh, our SLAs are a week right now." They're not going to be a week forever. They're going to go down to a few days. They're going to go down to a few hours. They're probably going to go down to a few minutes eventually. And one way of exploring that data is through a visualization tool, through a BI tool. Those BI tools are really useful when you first start. You want to know how your business is doing, but they become more and more important because you will be, they will eventually become revenue generators for you. It's not just that your executives are going to want to know how your sales are doing and how your product is doing, but you will be, part of your products will probably include some sort of a visualization or access to data metric tied to it. Or if what we see from a lot of our customers is that they have tiers. So I'm a company that sells data on foot traffic to restaurants, for example. And if I'm a restaurant, I get access to one level of data, but then the second level, if I pay you more, I get real-time access to my data. And then level 3 maybe is I get aggregate data of all the restaurants in my area. And then level 4 might be I get aggregate data of everybody in the US. So in order to support those levels, you can do that through the data that is sitting in Snowflake, for example, or another database. And of course, the more real time it is, the better. To visualize that, you can do it through something that you built. I don't recommend that you build your own BI tool. I don't recommend that you build your own database. And I don't recommend that you build your own ETL tool. But you can use the ones that we've talked about here, like Tableau, for example, is a great one, or you can use some of the open source ones. So now there's a few questions here that we have answered, and those are questions that we ask ourselves at Snowflake. So the first one was how much revenue and how many meetings did we get from the chatbot drive. The way to answer this in the old world would be to export the logs, to have some analysts go through it, probably in Excel, and then by the time this is done, then present it in a PDF on a presentation, and email it to the stakeholders. Of course, by the time that's done, data is already stale. In Snowflake and in a modern database world, you would get the live data from your Salesforce environment or your Salesforce instance. You would use an ETL tool like Matillion to get it to a database as quickly as possible. In our case, that's Snowflake, and in our case, that is real time. It gets updated every few minutes, and then Tableau is able to get insights from that data in real time. So we're not doing any extracts here. This is another important point. You want a database that is capable enough and fast enough to be able to answer the queries, the questions that come from the BI tool in real time. So no extracts. Tableau is not going to be acting like a small database. If that used to be needed in the old world, where your BI tools will be cosplaying as databases and they will store part of the data in it, that's a recipe for stale data and for slow BI tool. BI tools are great at being BI tools. They're not great at being databases.
Just for sake of time, so we covered these concepts. So some things to consider. It's nice to have a multi-cloud strategy. You might have customers that want to be on Amazon, some on Google, some on Microsoft. Be wary of products that promise to do everything in that pipeline we just showed you. Be careful with your cloud spend. Scalability is great, but you got to make sure you're not overscaling. Make sure your technical expertise is on point. It's a lot easier to find people that know SQL than it is to know a million different coding languages. Also know, like Pro was hinting at, different products for different use cases. Not every product is perfect at every use case. Snowflake is part of that group. So if a team is claiming that they are, that's a concerning sign. If you're interested in trying this out, we do have that startup program. I included a free trial link here as well, or if you just want to learn more about Snowflake. But with the 5 or so minutes that we have left, I think we can turn it over for Q&A.
Hi, so great presentation. I learned a lot. We do have one question that asks if you're able to be integrated with Google Firebase. We have a question in the chat about that.
Yeah, Snowflake integrates with a bunch of different tools, and Google Firebase is one of them. In that case, you land the data from Firebase into a Google Cloud bucket, and then from there, Snowflake will pick it up in a streaming fashion. And that's an important question because that's another part of how you want to evaluate your tools. You want tools that are not going to tie you in to a specific walled garden. Tools change. A few years ago, AWS was the only game in town. Google has been making great inroads. Now Microsoft obviously is a really important player there as well. You want to be able to use the best tools and the best features of each of these clouds, and that's why you want to be as vendor agnostic and as cloud agnostic as possible.
Okay, we have a question for Ben. Can you talk about how Snowflake engages with other vendors for partnerships?
Great question. It ranges, right? I mean, there's hundreds of different partners in our ecosystem. We covered 4 of many, but I'd say it's typically driven by customer interest, right? So if we have a joint customer that's on Snowflake and also on your technology, that's where we really try to focus our partnering on. If you have a product that you think could be a potential partner, I could answer via DM and try to connect the dots for you. But I'd say typically our partner strategy is 100% customer driven. Whatever they want to use, we're going to go and form a partnership with.
Any more questions? We have a couple of minutes. Well, I want to say on behalf of Startup Grind, thank you so much for that wonderful information. If you guys have a chance, connect with Ben and Prodine. And of course, connect with Startup Grind as well. And thank you for attending this summit. And our closing, head to the main stage because I believe our CEO, Derek, is giving a closing message in about 5 minutes. So thank you, everyone. And we hope that you have thoroughly enjoyed our summit today.
Thanks, Akeisha. Thank you, Startup Grind. And thanks to the attendees. That was fun.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.